Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nadin Sahasra, and I am from April batch 2018. So today I'm going to present about my research from my research regarding sexual harassment awareness during Omnibus law protests in Yogyakarta in October 2020 from Massa Aksi perspective. Okay. So these are the table of contents, which consists of six content. First, introduction, literature review, research method, findings, discussion, and conclusion. So my background from this research is that in Indonesia, the case of sexual harassment is never finished. Also, in the world of activism itself, there are also rampant cases of sexual harassment. So, the predicates and appendages of educated people do not rule out the possibility of making someone to not act sexist and also become a harasser. And sexual violence and harassment against women means that there are still the society is still perpetuating the patriarchal feudal system, which is also still preserved to this day. And then the problems caused by a failure to distinguish the concept of sex and gender, which is manifested in gender injustice, including sexual violence. So this sexual violence is also occurred because of the failure towards distinguishing the concept between sex and gender. Next, and then uh, sexism and patriarchal culture, which still exists until today, is also created the objectification of women. So women are basically seen as a symbol of chastity and also honor. So because they are seen as those kind of symbol, they are seen as a disgrace when they are experiencing a sexual violence, which can lead to the victims to refuse to tell those closest people about what happened to them in realm of sexual violence. According to Komnas Perempuan, sexual violence is more difficult to reveal and also to handle than any other form of violence because violence against other women is often linked to the concept of community morality. And then here is the literature review, which for my theoretical framework, I use Power Relation by Johan Galtung. So before going further to the sexual harassment itself, first, I would like to start with 15 types of sexual violence that are revealed by the Komnas Perempuan. So Komnas Perempuan found there are 15 types of sexual violence, which this is not the final form of sexual violence. And one of these sexual violence that is still exists today is sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is not different than sexual violence. And then, so what is sexual harassment? So sexual harassment is a sexual act through physical or non-physical, which targeting on the sexual organs or the sexuality of a victim. So basically, any action that makes the opposite sex feel uncomfortable, insecure, and prone to embarrassment can be categorized as sexual harassment, which any sexual action that do not require a consent and agreement from both parties can be concluded as sexual harassment. So according to Mansur Faki, in his book entitled of Gender Analysis and Social Transformation, which here I quote him in his book section that uh, tells about the gender and violence. He stated that one form of sexual harassment is unwanted attention from men, which this is the main context that I would uh, like to deliver. And then, so according to Johann Galtung, patriarchy creates dichotomy, which those dichotomy is related to the public and private roles, which that a dichotomy between public and private roles is emerging a form of power relations, which oppression of women is basically based on the power relation where there is a male tendency to control women, not only their body but the women's mind, women's attitude is controlled by men. So this is a common phenomenon that is happening in a patriarchal institution or society. So men's activities are also legitimized by patriarchal society. And so because there are still an existence of stigmas, taboos, and also power relations in a patriarchal society, so first off, it could lead to the reluctance of the victims to tell their closest people about what happened to them. And then victims are also being judged because of the complicated bureaucratic procedures. And then the absence of law enforcement with a background of gender understanding also lead to the discrimination of women or especially the victims of sexual violence. And then from the domestic or family scope, it is not uh, hard to see that the family itself is asking and interrogating the uh, what is the victims with a sexist question, which are cornering the victims. And then here, the empirical review, which I used the data from the increasing number of sexual violence during pandemic, and then the data about sexual harassment that happened during Omnibus Law protest in not only in Yogyakarta, I mean in Indonesia generally. And then here is the data. First, it's from KPPA or Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection revealed that in February 29th of February up to 5th June 2020, there were 710 violence against adult women during the COVID-19 pandemic, which it's increased in 20% percentage. And then from LBH Apik, which Legal Aid Institute for the Indonesian Women's Association for Justice, they revealed that in 16th March up to 7th June 2020, they received complaints of sexual violence against women 90 times every month. They receive these complaints about sexual violence against women. And then the third data revealed by Compact, which civil society coalitions against sexual violence, they stated that there were 17 complaints of sexual harassments, both physical and verbal harassment during the Omnibus Law protest. Again, this data from Compact is not merely limited in Yogyakarta protest only, but it's in Indonesia, which generally stated. So here the research methods, I use qualitative method, which conducted in interview with voice memo, also face-to-face meeting. So the participants from my research are from students from Visible UMY, batch 2018, I'm sorry. Then they were also becoming the Massa Aksi from Omnibus Law protest in Yogyakarta. So the question regarding this research is about the awareness towards sex and gender and also sexual harassment during Omnibus law protest. And then the procedure from this research is that I conduct an appointment with the respondents, the three respondents, in 21st and 24th November, which the length of the interview roughly were 12 until 19 minutes. And then here are the findings. So I basically conclude my findings into four subparts, which represents the four major thematic findings obtained from the interview. So first, about a basic knowledge of gender. Why that I include the basic knowledge of gender? Because of course it's important, because if without someone has no basic knowledge towards gender, it could lead to the misinterpret of the position, role, treatment of men and women, which to the point of sexual harassment, they could fail to distinguish and to position the victims of sexual violence. And then here is the question from the first subpart, which answered by the second respondents, which happened to be male. And the question is about, what do you know about the concept of sex and gender? So he stated that the concept of gender is basically a knowledge that used as a differentiator between sex and gender. So those differences will later be used as a way of looking at humans, both male and female. He stated that in minute 6.53. Then this question is also from the subparts one, which are basic knowledge of sex and gender. So question number two is about are there any differences between sex and gender? So this answer I took from the first respondent, which female respondent. She stated in minute uh, two that there is certainly a difference between the concept of sex and gender, which gender is something fluid and also could change, and it's a socially constructed concept, while sex is something biologically congenital. And then here is my second subpart, which uh, revealed about the concept of sexual harassment, sexism, and patriarchy according to my three respondents. So basically, this concept uh, is closely related to the marginalization of women, the degradation of women's dignity. So the section is revealing that in reasoning sexual harassment, a person does not become biased. So this is the importance of the concept of sexual harassment, sexism, and patriarchy. Then question number three, which I took the answer from the third respondent, male. Uh, so what do you know about the culture of patriarchy and sexism? Here, the respondent, the third respondent, stated that the way he views patriarchy, he considers that patriarchy is a culture that can be exchanged between men and women. And also sexism is the same concept as a patriarchy culture. Then question number four, how do you know and see and what is your point of view towards patriarchy and sexism? The second respondent, male, in minute of 14.1 seconds, he stated that in viewing patriarchy and sexism, he stated that he strongly disagreed towards patriarchy and sexism. Why? Because uh, sexism and patriarchy could lead to the injustice on and also inequality. And then he stated that sexism and patriarchy is still exists today, but it only exists in a different forms than in a previous decade. And then in minute 14.20 seconds, he began to show the example of patriarchy that happened a lot in the 90s. Then question number 5 is patriarchy and sexism create gender inequality, injustice, and sexual harassment. So the first respondent, a female respondent, answered that the culture of patriarchy and sexism can lead to gender injustice and also sexual harassment. Because not only that, patriarchy and sexism can also marginalize women and subordinate women in a political scope. She stated that in minute 4.50 seconds. Then question number 6, what is sexual harassment to you? So I took the answer from the third respondent, a male respondent. For him, sexual harassment is an act that is not based on the agreement of both parties in sexual harassment. And then he stated that in minute 8. So question number 7, what are the types of sexual harassment? I took the answer from the male respondent, which happened to be the second respondent. So for him, the types of sexual harassment, uh, there were two types of sexual harassment, which are physically and verbally. He stated that in minute 17.3 seconds. And then question number 8, when you joined the protest, did you recognize a sexual harassment? So I took the answer from the first respondent, female. Unfortunately, she recognized and aware towards the sexual harassment that happened during the Omnibus Law protest, which in line 10.47 seconds, she stated that according to me, there is a sexual harassment. For example, there are men who commented, the woman from Yale look voluptuous, let the judges take the stage. That's for sure. Yeah, I think that's harassment. So he can recognize and also he has an awareness towards the sexual harassment that happened during the Omnibus Law protest. And then this is the last question from my research, which regarding to the experience of sexual harassment that happened in Omnibus Law protest. And I took from the third respondent's answer, which in minute 19 point, I'm sorry, in minute 11.19 seconds, he stated that he did not get harassment. So I did not experience it. It refers to the sexual harassment. And then in line 11.24 seconds, he also confirmed that he was okay. So it's basically he did not get any harassment. And then here's the discussion. So basically, not all of the interviewees have enough awareness of gender studies. It could represented by the first and third respondents, which among of the three interviewees, there was only one respondent that could conclusively and elaborate the act of oppositions towards patriarchy and sexism. And then, so one of the interviewees among three interviewees confirmed that she witnessed a sexual harassment during the protest, which happened to be a verbal harassment. And then, so first respondent, which a female respondent witnessed an unexpected behavior from the group of men, which they were commenting on women's physical appearance. So this behavior in commenting women's physical appearance could lead to the inconvenience for the subject that specifically talk about, which this could be the evidence from what Mansur Faki has stated in his book, that one form of sexual harassment is unwanted attention from men. And then the conclusion is that even though not all of the respondents could explain comprehensively regarding the gender studies, but all of the respondents fortunately were able to identify what is sexual harassment. But theoretically, the failure in distinguishing the concept of sex and gender, also the inability to understand the culture of a patriarchy and also sexism, it is highly possible in failing to position women and men equally in rights. And it also can lead to the failure in reasoning what is sexual harassment, as I mentioned before. The failure in distinguishing those concepts could lead someone to uh, a biased gender assumptions that could cornering the victims. And then, so the evidence of verbal harassment, it proves that the existence of women in the public sphere, such as demonstration, could draw the attention of men and lead women to be sexually harassed. Because the as we know that in society it is still patriarchal, and not all of the people could understand the gender and sex concept, because not all of the people could get comprehensive education, also radical education. So it's still emerge and also exists the patriarchal and sexism culture. And then, fortunately for the participant, they did not experience any sexual harassment during the protest. So I guess that's all from my presentation. Thank you for the time. Uh, See you in the next opportunity. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.